World War II. The origins of conflict. World War II was a culmination of unresolved tensions stemming from World War I, particularly highlighted by the Treaty of Versailles. This treaty, signed in 1919, imposed heavy reparations and territorial losses on Germany, which bred resentment and economic hardship. The reparations demanded from Germany were intended to hold the nation accountable for the war, but they instead contributed to a national crisis that fostered anger and a desire for revenge among the German populace. By the mid-1930s, the repercussions of this treaty became evident as totalitarian ideologies gained traction across Europe and Asia. Communism, under Joseph Stalin's USSR, fascism led by Benito Mussolini in Italy, and Adolf Hitler's Nazism in Germany all emerged as formidable threats. These regimes shared a commitment to totalitarianism, which allowed them to exert extensive control over their populations and suppress dissent. The failures and grievances following World War I significantly contributed to the rise of such ideologies, setting the stage for another global conflict and the dramatic events that would unfold in the 1930s and 1940s. Economic turmoil during the Great Depression further exacerbated these tensions, leading to political instability in various countries, including Germany, Italy, and Japan. In Germany, the economic crisis led to widespread unemployment and suffering, creating fertile ground for extremist parties like the Nazis to gain support. Hitler capitalized on this discontent, promising to restore Germany's former glory and expand its territory. Similarly, Italy, under Mussolini, sought to rebuild the nation's power and influence in Europe, while Japan pursued aggressive expansion in Asia, driven by a desire for resources and territory. The rise of totalitarian regimes was not merely a reaction to the economic hardships of the time, but also a result of deep-seated nationalism and a desire for strong leadership. Citizens of these nations were disillusioned with traditional democratic governments, which seemed unable to provide solutions to their problems. In Germany, the Weimar Republic struggled with hyperinflation and political extremism, while in Italy, Mussolini's fascist rhetoric promised stability and national pride amidst chaos. These factors contributed to a volatile political landscape, where radical solutions gained traction. Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Adolf Hitler emerged as a central figure in the conflict, playing a pivotal role in the events leading up to World War II. Born in Austria in 1889, Hitler became a German citizen shortly before World War I and served honorably in that conflict as a lance corporal. After the war, he became involved in politics and eventually took control of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, in the early 1920s. By 1933, Hitler had risen to the position of Chancellor of Germany, using a combination of political maneuvering and violence to eliminate opposition. Hitler's vision for Germany included the idea of a Third Reich that would last 1,000 years, based on notions of racial superiority and nationalism. He believed that Germany needed to reclaim lost territories and fight against its World War I enemies. Hitler's aggressive policies and military strategies, particularly the development of the Blitzkrieg, or Lightning War, aimed at achieving quick victories without the prolonged trench warfare characteristic of World War I. His expansionist ambitions led to the reoccupation of the Rhineland in 1936, the annexation of Austria in 1938, and the Munich Agreement, which allowed him to annex the Sudetenland of Czechoslovakia, all without facing significant opposition from the major powers of Europe. The Munich Agreement, signed in September 1938, epitomized the policy of appeasement that characterized the responses of Britain and France towards Hitler's aggressive expansion. By allowing Hitler to annex parts of Czechoslovakia in exchange for a promise of no further territorial claims, Western leaders believed they could prevent a larger conflict. However, this strategy ultimately failed as Hitler continued to pursue his expansionist goals unabated, leading to further aggression and the eventual outbreak of World War II. The Axis powers. Fascist Italy, led by Mussolini, formed an unlikely alliance with Nazi Germany despite differences in their leadership styles and ideologies. Mussolini sought to unify Italy and establish himself as a supreme leader, while Hitler's ambitions extended beyond national borders to conquer and expand. This collaboration, along with Japan under Emperor Hirohito, formed the Axis powers, united by their military aggression and totalitarian principles. The Axis alliance combined the strengths of Germany's military might, Italy's strategic ambitions, and Japan's ruthless fighting spirit, which posed a significant threat to the Allies. The Tripartite Pact signed in 1940 solidified the alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan, creating a formidable coalition against the Allied powers. Despite their collaborations, the relationship among these nations was often strained due to differing interests and objectives. For instance, while Germany and Italy coordinated some military efforts, Japan's focus on expanding its empire in Asia sometimes diverged from European priorities. Nonetheless, the Axis powers operated under a common goal: to expand their territories and influence through military conquest. The Axis powers engaged in a series of aggressive military campaigns that began with the invasion of Poland by Germany on September 1, 1939. This invasion was followed by the Soviet invasion of Poland from the east, resulting in the division of the country between the two powers. The rapid fall of Poland illustrated the effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg strategy, which emphasized speed and coordination between air and ground forces. Following Poland's defeat, Germany launched a series of successful campaigns across Western Europe, quickly conquering Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Western leaders' response. In the West, leaders like British Prime Minister Winston S. Churchill and U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt recognized the growing danger posed by the Axis powers. However, they struggled to galvanize their nations into action. The U.S. Congress passed several neutrality acts during the 1930s, reflecting a strong isolationist sentiment among the American public. These acts limited FDR's ability to respond effectively to the rising threats, even as he warned citizens through speeches about the dangers of totalitarianism. His quarantine speech in 1937 highlighted the need for collective action against aggressors, but largely fell on deaf ears in a nation reluctant to engage in foreign conflicts. Churchill, who had long warned of the dangers posed by Hitler, found himself out of power and largely ignored by the British public until the threat became undeniable. FDR, on the other hand, was in office and attempted to rally support for aiding Britain and France against Nazi aggression. However, many Americans were still reeling from the losses of World War I and were determined to avoid another overseas conflict. This isolationist sentiment posed a significant challenge for leaders who understood the necessity of confronting the Axis powers before it was too late. The rise of Nazi Germany and its aggressive expansion into neighboring countries underlined the failures of appeasement and the need for a strong response. Churchill's return to power in May 1940 marked a turning point in British resolve as he rallied the nation to prepare for a potential conflict with Germany. His speeches inspired hope and determination, emphasizing that Britain would fight on against the Nazi threat, even in the face of overwhelming odds. The outbreak of war. The war officially began on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, leading to the swift collapse of Polish defenses. This invasion was soon complemented by Soviet invasion from the east due to the non-aggression pact between Hitler and Stalin. The shocking speed at which Poland fell demonstrated the effectiveness of the Blitzkrieg strategy, which emphasized rapid movement and coordination among air and ground forces. The Polish army, despite its bravery and determination, was overwhelmed by the superior German military tactics and technology. In the U.S., the isolationist sentiment was further reinforced by citizen committees such as America First, which aimed to keep the nation out of foreign wars. Prominent figures like Charles Lindbergh advocated for non-involvement, arguing that the U.S. should focus on its own affairs rather than intervene in European conflicts. As reports of German aggression and the suffering of occupied nations began to circulate, however, public sentiment slowly started to shift, with increasing calls for action against the Axis powers. The fall of Poland set off a chain reaction, leading to Britain and France declaring war on Germany on September 3, 1939. This marked the beginning of a wider conflict that would soon engulf much of the world. Despite the declaration of war, there was a period of relative inaction known as the Phony War, during which there was little military engagement on the Western Front. This period of uncertainty would not last long, as Germany quickly unleashed its military might in a series of lightning offensives against Denmark, Norway, and then the Low Countries. U.S. support for allies. As Germany continued its military successes across Europe, FDR recognized the pressing need to support Britain, which stood alone against Nazi aggression. He proposed the Lend-Lease program, allowing the U.S. to supply war material to its allies without direct involvement. This policy aimed to ensure that Britain did not succumb to Hitler's forces, as FDR believed it was vital to prevent further Axis expansion. The 1940 election saw FDR secure a third term, emphasizing the importance of stability and experienced leadership during a time of global crisis. The Lend-Lease program marked a significant shift in U.S. foreign policy, moving from isolationism toward a more active role in global affairs. Through this program, the U.S. provided military equipment, food, and other supplies to Britain and other allied nations, strengthening their ability to resist Axis aggression. The program not only bolstered the morale of the Allies, but also helped to stimulate the American economy as war production ramped up. The American industry transformed to produce vast quantities of war material, including tanks, aircraft, and ships, underscoring the nation's transition from a peacetime economy to a wartime powerhouse. Additionally, the U.S. sought to strengthen its diplomatic ties with other nations facing the threat of Axis expansion. FDR's administration engaged in negotiations with various countries to forge alliances and create a united front against the Axis powers. The establishment of the Atlantic Charter in August 1941, signed by FDR and Churchill, set forth shared goals for the post-war world, emphasizing principles of self-determination, disarmament, and economic cooperation. Vision for a post-war world. FDR's vision for a post-war world was articulated in his Four Freedoms speech in January 1941, which outlined essential human rights that should be upheld globally. He emphasized the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of worship, freedom from want, and freedom from fear. This vision resonated with many Americans and laid the groundwork for the United Nations, which would aim to promote international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. The Four Freedoms speech captured the ideals that would guide Allied efforts during the war and beyond. FDR's articulation of these freedoms provided a moral framework for the fight against totalitarianism and inspired many to support the war effort. As the conflict intensified, the principles of the Four Freedoms became central to the Allied narrative, emphasizing the importance of democracy, human rights, and global cooperation. Later that year, the Atlantic Charter was signed with Churchill, establishing shared goals for peace, security, and the promotion of democracy after the war. The Charter articulated the principles of self-determination, disarmament, and economic cooperation, reflecting the aspirations of the Allied nations. This agreement laid the groundwork for cooperative efforts between the U.S. and Britain, reflecting their commitment to opposing the Axis powers and envisioning a better world order. The Atlantic Charter served as a pivotal document in shaping the post-war landscape. It not only expressed the intentions of the Allies, but also set the stage for the creation of international organizations aimed at fostering peace and cooperation. The principles outlined in the Charter would later be incorporated into the founding of the United Nations, which sought to ensure that the lessons learned from World War II would not be forgotten. The attack on Pearl Harbor. In December 1941, the situation escalated dramatically when Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, leading to the U.S. declaring war on Japan the following day. This attack unified American sentiment and provided the catalyst for full-scale U.S. involvement in the conflict. The impact of Pearl Harbor reverberated throughout the nation, igniting a strong war effort and mobilizing millions of Americans to enlist and contribute to the cause. The attack also illustrated the ruthless nature of the Japanese military, further solidifying the resolve of American forces. The surprise attack on December 7, 1941, resulted in significant losses for the U.S. Pacific Fleet, with numerous battleships and aircraft destroyed. However, the absence of aircraft carriers at Pearl Harbor, which were vital to naval warfare, would prove fortuitous for the U.S. Navy. In the aftermath of the attack, President Roosevelt delivered his famous Day of Infamy speech, urging Congress to declare war on Japan. The declaration passed overwhelmingly, marking the official entry of the United States into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor had profound effects on American society. It galvanized public opinion in favor of war, transforming the largely isolationist sentiment into a fervent commitment to defeating the Axis powers. People from all walks of life mobilized to support the war effort, with many volunteering for military service, while others contributed to war production efforts at home. The attack also prompted significant changes in U.S. military strategy and policy, as the nation rapidly expanded its armed forces and military capabilities. Mobilization for war. The U.S. mobilization for war brought significant changes to American society. The draft was reinstated, and millions of men and women entered the workforce to support the war effort. Women, in particular, began to take up roles in industries and military support positions, leading to a cultural shift in gender roles. Programs like the Bracero program were introduced to address labor shortages, particularly in agriculture, as many Americans were called to serve in the military. The war effort transformed everyday life, with rationing becoming common and propaganda campaigns rallying the nation behind the cause. With the onset of war, the U.S. government established agencies to manage production and resource allocation effectively. The War Production Board coordinated the conversion of peacetime industries to wartime production, resulting in the rapid expansion of military manufacturing. Factories produced tanks, aircraft, ships, and other essential materials at unprecedented rates, leading to a thriving wartime economy that ultimately pulled the nation out of the Great Depression. Women played an extraordinary role in the war effort, symbolized by the iconic figure of Rosie the Riveter. They filled jobs in factories, shipyards, and other industries critical to the war effort, demonstrating their capabilities in roles traditionally held by men. This cultural shift had lasting effects on gender roles in American society and contributed to the long-term push for women's rights and equality in the workforce. Additionally, the war prompted significant changes in racial dynamics within the military and society. African Americans, who had long faced discrimination and segregation, enlisted in large numbers, seeking to serve their country while simultaneously fighting against the injustices they faced at home. Their contributions to the war effort helped to challenge stereotypes and advocate for civil rights, laying the groundwork for the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 1960s. Contributions of minority groups. Despite facing challenges, minority groups also contributed significantly to the war effort. Japanese Americans, despite enduring internment due to wartime fears, sought to demonstrate their loyalty by serving in the military. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team, composed mostly of Japanese American soldiers, became one of the most decorated units in U.S. history. Their bravery and service helped to challenge the stereotypes and prejudices that had led to their internment in the first place. Similarly, African Americans rallied to serve with units like the Tuskegee Airmen breaking barriers in the segregated military. The Tuskegee Airmen became renowned for their exceptional flying skills and bravery, escorting bombers on dangerous missions and achieving numerous accolades for their service. Their contributions were instrumental in changing perceptions of African Americans in the military and society, as they fought not only against Axis forces, but also against the systemic racism present in their own country. The efforts of Native Americans during the war also deserve recognition. Many Native Americans served in various capacities within the military, and the use of their languages, such as Navajo, for code talking during battles provided the Allies with a significant advantage. The code talkers played a crucial role in secure communications, ensuring that enemy forces could not decipher crucial messages. This contribution highlighted the unique skills and cultural heritage of Native Americans, which were often overlooked in broader societal narratives. Key victories and strategies. The U.S. achieved notable victories in both the European and Pacific theaters, with crucial turning points such as the Battle of Midway. This victory ensured that the United States would remain on the offensive in the Pacific, employing the strategy of island hopping to bypass heavily fortified positions. Concurrently, FDR and Churchill met with Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin at the Tehran Conference, where they discussed strategies to defeat the Axis powers and agreed on the need for unconditional surrender. The Battle of Midway, fought in June 1942, marked a significant turning point in the Pacific theater. U.S. intelligence successfully deciphered Japanese plans, allowing American forces to prepare for the attack. The decisive victory at Midway not only halted Japanese expansion in the Pacific, but also shifted the balance of power in favor of the Allies. From this point on, the U.S. adopted an island-hopping strategy, capturing strategically important islands while bypassing others, ultimately leading to the assault on Japan's home islands. In Europe, the Allies faced significant challenges as they sought to push back against German advances. The North African Campaign, which began in 1942, was crucial for establishing a foothold in Europe. American and British forces worked together to defeat Axis troops in North Africa, culminating in the successful Operation Torch. This operation marked the beginning of the campaign to liberate Europe from Nazi control, setting the stage for future operations in Italy and France. Conferences and strategic decisions. As the war progressed towards its conclusion, the Yalta Conference in February 1945 saw FDR, Churchill, and Stalin strategizing for the post-war world. However, FDR's declining health affected his leadership during this critical time. His death on April 12, 1945, left a leadership void, with Harry S. Truman stepping into the presidency amid the ongoing conflict. The liberation of concentration camps in Germany closely followed FDR's death, shocking many Americans and solidifying their resolve to ensure that such atrocities would never happen again. The Yalta Conference resulted in significant agreements regarding the post-war order in Europe. The leaders discussed the division of Germany, the establishment of democratic governments in liberated nations, and the formation of the United Nations. However, differing visions for post-war Europe, particularly between the Western Allies and Stalin, foreshadowed the tensions that would arise during the Cold War. Truman's ascension to the presidency presented new challenges, particularly in navigating relations with the Soviet Union and addressing the implications of the atomic bomb. The Potsdam Conference, held in July 1945, brought together the new leaders of the Allies to finalize plans for post-war Europe and to address the ongoing conflict in the Pacific. Truman's discussions with Stalin were marked by a growing sense of tension, as the two leaders grappled with the implications of the war's outcome and the future of Europe. The conference highlighted the divisions that were beginning to emerge between the United States and the Soviet Union, setting the stage for the geopolitical landscape of the post-war world. The end of the European conflict. Hitler's suicide on April 30, 1945, marked a significant turning point, leading to Germany's unconditional surrender on May 8, 1945, celebrated as Victory in Europe Day. The months leading up to this event saw intense fighting in Europe as Allied forces advanced for both the West and the East, culminating in the fall of Berlin. The surrender of Germany marked the end of the conflict in Europe, but the war in the Pacific continued as the U.S. sought to defeat Japan. The final months of the European conflict were characterized by rapid advances by Allied forces. The Soviet Red Army pushed through Eastern Europe, liberating territories from Nazi control, while Western allies launched offensives across France and into Germany itself. The Battle of the Bulge in late 1944 represented Germany's last major offensive in the West. Despite initial successes, the offensive ultimately failed, depleting German resources and manpower. As Allied forces closed in on Berlin, the city became a focal point of the struggle. The Soviet Union encircled the city, leading to a fierce battle for its capture. The fall of Berlin was marked by brutal street fighting, as German forces fought desperately to defend their capital. Ultimately, the Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag building, symbolizing the total defeat of Nazi Germany. The surrender of Germany heralded a new era for Europe. The devastation wrought by the war left cities in ruins and millions of people displaced. The Allied powers faced the immense challenge of rebuilding a war-torn continent and addressing the political and social ramifications of the conflict. The Nuremberg trials would later seek to hold key Nazi leaders accountable for war crimes, setting a precedent for international law and justice. The war in the Pacific. While the war in Europe concluded with Germany's surrender, the conflict in the Pacific continued as the Allies sought to defeat Japan. The strategy of island hopping that emerged following the Battle of Midway allowed U.S. forces to bypass heavily fortified Japanese positions and capture strategically important islands. This approach was instrumental in establishing airfields and bases close to Japan, enabling direct assaults against the Japanese homeland. Major battles such as the Battle of Guadalcanal, the Battle of Iwo Jima, and the Battle of Okinawa showcased the fierce resistance and determination of Japanese forces. The fighting in the Pacific was characterized by brutal combat and significant loss of life on both sides. The Japanese military adhered to a code of honor that often led to fierce resistance, with many soldiers preferring death to surrender. The Battle of Iwo Jima, fought in early 1945, became iconic for its depiction of American perseverance and sacrifice. The famous photograph of U.S. Marines raising the American flag atop Mount Suribachi captured the spirit of determination that defined the campaign. The battle itself resulted in heavy casualties, with thousands of American soldiers and nearly all Japanese defenders losing their lives. As the Allies prepared for an invasion of Japan, the prospect of massive casualties loomed large. Estimates suggested that an invasion could result in hundreds of thousands of American casualties and even more Japanese losses. It was within this context that the decision to use atomic bombs emerged as a controversial yet decisive strategy. The decision to use atomic bombs. In the summer of 1945, the Manhattan Project culminated in the successful development of atomic weapons. The project, which brought together some of the brightest scientific minds, aimed to harness nuclear energy for military purposes. President Truman, who had assumed office after FDR's death, faced the monumental decision of whether to use atomic bombs against Japan. The rationale behind using atomic bombs was multifaceted. Truman and his advisors believed that deploying the bombs would bring about a swift end to the war, saving countless lives that would otherwise be lost in a protracted invasion of Japan. Additionally, demonstrating the power of the atomic bomb was seen as a way to assert U.S. dominance on the global stage and send a clear message to the Soviet Union regarding American military capabilities. On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on the city of Hiroshima, resulting in unprecedented destruction and loss of life. The bomb detonated with a force equivalent to approximately 15,000 tons of TNT, obliterating much of the city and causing immediate and long-term suffering for its inhabitants. 3 days later, on August 9th, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, leading to a similar catastrophic impact. The decision to use atomic bombs has been the subject of extensive debate and analysis. Critics argue that the bombings were unnecessary, pointing to Japan's deteriorating war situation and its potential willingness to surrender. Proponents contend that the bombings ultimately saved lives by preventing a costly invasion and hastening Japan's capitulation. Regardless of the arguments, the use of atomic bombs marked a pivotal moment in history and ushered in the nuclear age, profoundly altering the nature of warfare and international relations. The surrender of Japan. Following the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan announced its unconditional surrender on August 15, 1945, a day that would come to be known as VJ Day. The formal surrender ceremony took place on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. Representatives from the Japanese government signed the surrender documents, officially bringing World War II to a close. The end of the war in the Pacific had significant implications for the region and the world as a whole. The United States emerged as a dominant global power, having played a crucial role in defeating the Axis powers. The war had also shifted the balance of power in Asia, leading to the emergence of new geopolitical dynamics and the eventual onset of the Cold War. In the aftermath of the war, Japan underwent a profound transformation. Under the Allied occupation, led by General Douglas MacArthur, Japan implemented sweeping reforms aimed at democratization and modernization. The new constitution, adopted in 1947, renounced war and established a parliamentary system of government. Additionally, land reforms and economic assistance contributed to Japan's rapid recovery and eventual emergence as an economic powerhouse in the latter half of the 20th century. Post-war implications. In the aftermath of World War II, the United Nations was established to foster international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. FDR had envisioned this organization to address the failures of the League of Nations, and it became a cornerstone for global diplomacy. The charter adopted by delegates from 50 nations reflected high-minded intentions for peace and security, setting a new stage for international relations in a rapidly changing world. The establishment of the United Nations aimed to create a platform for dialogue and negotiation among nations, promoting the principles of human rights and self-determination. The organization would also play a crucial role in addressing issues such as decolonization, conflict resolution, and humanitarian assistance. However, the challenges of reconciling differing national interests and ideologies would pose ongoing difficulties in the pursuit of global peace. The war catalyzed movements for civil rights and social justice, particularly for African Americans, who began to push back against systemic racism and segregation. The contributions of African Americans, women, and other marginalized groups during the war highlighted the contradictions within American society. While they fought bravely for freedom abroad, they continued to face discrimination and inequality at home. The experiences of these groups during the war would serve as a catalyst for the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s, as activists sought to address the injustices that persisted in post-war America. In addition to social changes, the geopolitical landscape shifted dramatically as the world emerged from the ashes of war. The Cold War began to take shape as tensions rose between the United States and the Soviet Union, leading to a division of Europe into East and West. The establishment of NATO and the Warsaw Pact reflected the ideological and military alignments that characterized the post-war period. Legacy and social change. The impacts of World War II extended deeply into American society and the global landscape. The war catalyzed movements for civil rights and social justice, particularly for African Americans, who began to push back against systemic racism and segregation. The legacy of the war influenced not only U.S. domestic policy, but also shaped the geopolitical landscape for decades to come, setting the stage for the Cold War and ongoing struggles for equality and justice worldwide. The contributions of African Americans, women, and other marginalized groups during the war highlighted the contradictions within American society. While they fought bravely for freedom abroad, they continued to face discrimination and inequality at home. The experiences of these groups during the war would serve as a catalyst for the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s, as activists sought to address the injustices that persisted in post-war America.